Hello, Harry Brownlow, shoulder specialist. Today I'm going to be talking about the issues around the consent for rotator cuff repair. Now, presumably you're considering having this operation because it's already been established that your rotator cuff has torn and you've thought about alternative ways of managing it, which might be non-operative. You may choose just to live with the symptoms that you've got. You may well choose to go through a course of physiotherapy. You might have had injections already. Or you might have thought, well, I'll have a lesser operation, perhaps an arthroscopic decompression with biceps tenotomy as an example. But probably you're listening to this because you've already discussed it with your doctor and you've decided that this is the route you want to go. And by and large, it's a very safe and very reliable procedure. But before you finally sign your name to the consent form, it's important to understand that there are potential risks and complications, and these are certainly worth bearing in mind. So, what can go wrong? Well, to start with, the first thing that can go wrong is the operation may be a failure. So it's probably successful in 90–95% of people, but there are a small number of people who are disappointed in the end result. So you do have to be prepared to accept that you might be going through this operation and all the rigmarole that comes with it, and a year on after you've had your full rehabilitation, you're still a bit disappointed. It's not quite as good as you'd like. And if you are in that unlucky group, there are usually other things that could be considered at that stage. So I would consider any failure anybody who's not entirely happy with the long-term outcomes. The next complication is stiffness. Now the shoulder can and does often go stiff after this operation. I always think that if we do a big operation and stick you in a sling for up to 6 weeks, that's a great recipe for making your shoulder go stiff. So perhaps it's almost inevitable that some stiffness will incur. But time and physiotherapy almost always puts it right. And if you're one of those really unlucky people that have resistant stiffness after this operation, there is further surgery that can be considered just to release the scarring where it's happened. So stiffness is something to bear in mind, but I don't think really should be something that should put you off the idea of the operation. The next complication is one we fear a lot, and that's infection. Now, if you're having the operation done through keyhole surgery, the risk of infection is very small, simply because when we do the operation, we have lots of saline washing through your shoulder joint, and it really doesn't give the organisms an opportunity to settle. But we will be implanting little anchors into your bone, and there are sutures, and any foreign material that we introduce into anybody's body does carry the risk of having infection bind to it and becomes difficult to eradicate. So if you are one of those really unlucky people to develop infection, it can be an absolute nightmare. It may very well mean that the whole operation has to be unpicked through another operation, and you might require further surgery to get on top of the infection. You may very well require a prolonged period of antibiotics, and at the end of it there's a possibility anyway that you're worse off than you were before you ever started. And at that point we will both regret ever having made the decision. But it's a decision you really can only make in retrospect, because vast majority of people sail through this procedure without any infection. And we do, of course, always give you antibiotics intravenously at the start of the operation to minimise the risk of infection. Now, the next complication we wish to consider is nerve injury. Thankfully, that's something that's really, really uncommon. We know where the nerves are around the shoulder. We're incredibly careful and very nervous about making sure that we don't do any damage to the nerves. And therefore, thankfully, I think because we're so careful, the risk of serious nerve injury is very, very small indeed. Something worth listening to, something worth giving some thought to, but I think it's unlikely to be the sort of level of risk that would put you off having an operation. There's one more that I should mention, and that is re-tear. Any tendon that's been torn once is at risk of tearing again in the future. In fact, it's at slightly higher risk of tearing. Although we can get it to heal, perhaps it never heals quite as well as it did before it had originally torn. But that's true of any tendon that we fix throughout the body. So those are your 5: failure, infection, stiffness, nerve injury, and re-tear. And of course, it's important that you bear in mind this is a very general consent video, and there may well be specific issues that relate to you that you need to discuss with your own surgeon. Thank you.